Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. On the show today, Camille, Maurine, and Lorin Roche. So Lorin is the author of the Radiance Sutras, which is a very well-known and loved book, I would say, and has been teaching meditation for 50 plus years, as well as having a PhD in meditation research. He works with Camille, who's his partner in training, and also in life. Camille was also the author of 2 books, including one on meditation for women. So you are both super welcome today.
Thank you, Mark. So good to be with you.
Thank you, Mark.
And you were saying we're in this slightly odd time right now, at time of recording things on total lockdown in the US or the UK, but people are starting to sort of withdraw a little bit, aren't they, because of the virus? And Lorin, you described this as enforced meditation retreat, was it?
It is. Things are, as we walk around the city, things are very peaceful. And I think there's a deeper appreciation of life.
I'm seeing it almost as an enforced existential meditation. You know, it's like a death meditation for so many of us, that people are really thinking about life and death. And that is scary, but also it's bringing kind of an intensity to life. It reminds me of when I used to hear my grandparents talking about living through the Blitz in London. There's some feeling of intensity around it.
Exactly. One of the miracles of the modern world is that so few people die prematurely. The average age it's extraordinary. People are living into their 70s and early 80s on average. And so we're not as familiar with death. And so it's kind of shocking to realize, oh my God, I'm only here temporarily. And this has always been an ally to spiritual practice and meditation practice. It's important to live every moment. That's what meditation is about. It's cherishing with great vitality every single moment. And we need all the tools that we can muster to do that. It takes everything.
That's right. So now is the time when all of that comes into play and is really essential. And you're right. It's confronting many issues in our lives. And it's also a chance in terms of this enforced retreat. People are exhausted. They were exhausted prior. And all that's been going on the globe, apart from this pandemic, has, it's vibrating in people's nervous systems. So having practices that actually address the embodied sense of grounding, of being at home on this earth, of accessing all of our resources, everything that nourishes us, everything that inspires us, everything that puts us in touch with our love. And as Lorin is saying, it is an opportunity for people to say, where are my loved ones? How can I stay in communion with the people that I care about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we've jumped right into the present day here, which is good. And I also want to learn a bit more about you both. So can I ask your relationship to the body? How did that develop? So it may have been as a child or growing up. Let's take it back as far as seems wise.
Well, I'll begin by saying that I began dancing, meditating, and doing yoga at approximately the same time, many years ago now, 47 years ago or something crazy. And so there was a natural marriage of dance and meditation in my own inner practices. Dancing gave me a way to actually be embodied and to feel the energies that were percolating inside of me. And then somewhere along the line, I became a body worker. I studied healing forms. But there was always this fascination, sort of existential, as you mentioned earlier, essential, existential, curiosity about the inner dance that we are, the dance of energies and the dance of love, and how to be with, when I met Lorin, then it was, then how do I bring this into the dance of love with him, which is quite an art.
We'll definitely come back to that later. That's a great topic. Lorin, what about you? What was your early interest in the body?
Well, I grew up in a family of surfers, we lived at the beach and spent every possible moment at the beach. And when I was a little kid, I would be surfing, and then we would come in and fall asleep on the beach around the campfire where the adults who were mostly aerospace engineers would be talking about physics and the moon program and Einstein and rockets. And in surfing back in the day, before there were wetsuits, we would be diving into the cold water and then ducking under waves. And then surfing is mostly wading on most days. It's really paddling and wading. So you're looking at the horizon, near, almost, shivering, and you warm up. And it's very meditative. It's very yogic, really, the physicality of surfing. So when I got into meditation, I was so lucky because my first experience was in a science lab where they paid me to sit in a completely pitch black, completely silent room, wired up to a brainwave machine and with wires on my belly and my hands for hours a day, every day for weeks. And they gave me no instruction whatsoever. So I had nothing to do but pay attention to what was happening. I had no instruction. And this was 1968. What was that, 52 years ago? People weren't talking about meditation very much.
Right. It's really changed. Yeah. Yeah.
So I had no expectation. So I just paid attention basically to the rhythms of experience and to the senses. And that turns out to be a key to success in meditation.
And what's been your meditation background since then? Is there a particular lineage you guys have worked with, Tibetan or Zen, or kind of what's been your main practice?
Well, we're both in lineages. Camille's very Tibetan, and I'm really have an affinity to the Kashmir, what's called Kashmir Shaivism. But it's really just one particular very narrow thread. It's like 1,000th of 1% of that current. It's for me, it's this particular lineage. It's clearly for householders or people who live in the world, who are in relationship, as opposed to being for monastics, people who are not in an intimate relationship or don't want to have the capacity for intimacy.
Uh-huh.
And I was also very involved in something called Continuum movement.
Emily Comrade's work, yeah.
Yeah, and for decades, and Emily was a great friend and ally, and good friend to us both. And that had echoes of many of the traditions, certainly the fundamental, like the essential teachings within all of them, and the subtle embodied awareness. I feel that in a way that's a confluence on the planet right now, that there's almost like a new lineage being born that I feel like we're part of. And it's an integration and that adaptability for this 21st century.
Camille and I are both interested more in going forward. We pay attention to what works.
Uh-huh.
We interview people all over the world about what's working for them in a meditation practice. The traditions, by definition, tend to be backward looking. It's sort of a fantasy based on somebody's diary of what worked for somebody 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we cherish those teachings, but our emphasis is what's working now and what needs to be developed in the future. Because there are, just in the United States, I don't have the statistics for England or Australia or Europe right here, but just in the United States, about 17% of adult American females practice meditation on Sunday.
That's huge, huh? I couldn't have imagined that 20 years ago.
According to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, part of the National Institute of Health, there's over 34 million Americans experimenting with meditation.
Wow.
34 million out of 320 million approximately. And those numbers are from 3 years ago. It may have increased by now because the trend for 20 years has been steadily upward. So it's a huge number of millions of people are experimenting with meditation. And to a great extent, people feel frustrated and they feel like a failure when they meditate. And they hold themselves up to an impossible ideal that their mind is supposed to go completely blank. And that's not meditation at all, actually.
I just want to kind of take a moment to say, like, wow, on that figure. Like, I haven't really thought about it, but it makes sense. And I mean, that's possibly a greater percentage of the population that were meditating in Tibet in 1940, just because, not everyone was meditating, right? So, I mean, it's a hell of a thing. And I guess the next question becomes like, well, why isn't America enlightened then? Like it's kind of, is that a fair question or an unfair question?
Another 60,
well,
83%.
We see that too, because my experience being around people who find the technique that works for them is that there's a lot of laughter. There's a tremendous vitality that people discover that they click into and that they can bring to their daily life. And that's a side effect of finding the type of meditation that works for you. And the great mystery and what needs to be developed is what technique works for that particular person today at this stage of life. And people are wildly different inside. Some people should never sit still. Just dance. And then when you feel fulfilled from dancing, stand and pay attention to your breathing or lie down and feel the delicious energies of motion swirling around in your body.
Life force.
For other people, smell and taste is the way that they know that the world is a place of great delight. And other people, it's music. So it's finding your particular pathways in so that you feel like you're communing with the delicious essence of life, the thrill of being alive. That's the core of meditation.
Yes. Yes. And it could also be that our, the interconnection globally is such a powerful development that we know what's happening on the other side of the earth in an instant, and that we can communicate like this through these fabulous media of technology. That I think we're in a transitional phase of getting used to that much interconnection and realizing actually with these crises the need for acknowledging our interdependence with all life on earth. And so in a way, technology has a call for us to return or to integrate that fundamental connection that, many of the ancients and the native peoples are very great teachers of. How do we be on this earth together? And so there's a call. Somehow the technology is playing a part in the evolution.
It's interesting, isn't it? Especially, this current crisis, that ideas are being shared around the world, research is being shared. Okay, does it do well in a hot climate? And it's confusing. There's also misinformation being shared, and there's the fake news being shared, and the sort of new age nonsense is being shared, and all the rest of it. And then there's, China sending technology to Italy to help them out. And there's a real possibility of something quite beautiful, but simultaneously there's a risk of a return to tribalism as nations close their borders. And
it's already happening.
Look after. There's sort of both things happening in this current event, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
right.
We're in tribalism, but it's not as bad as it was in the past. If you look at the way tribes, say the tribes that anthropologists interviewed, behave, if a bunch of people get sick in a tribal mentality, that it's not because of bacteria or a virus, it's because that woman over there is a witch. So it could be a woman living alone because, she's like an old lady and her husband died and her kids moved away. Or it could be a woman whose kids didn't die. Either way, she's screwed. the scapegoating effect, where people think, oh, the reason that people are sick is because that woman over there is a witch. So we've got to burn her. So that's tribal thinking. It's scapegoating. And there's less of that going on today. As wicked as certain realms of the internet are, there's less scapegoating probably than ever, even though there's evidence of it. You have to look at trends.
Yeah,
and
sure.
people are waking up, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, let's breathe for a moment with that possibility, that reality.
I do also like to look at the longer term trends. You know, Steven Pinker's big on this, and the evolutionary psychology of people like Ken Wilber of looking at, we are actually developing less tribally. There is a global consciousness around, you know what, it does actually make sense to send medicine to Italy or China rather than keep it to yourself, which, you know, in the 19th century would have been totally the norm. It does make sense to look at this expanded worldview. And I do wonder, you know, current events, how it's going to impact us. I think it will be quite impactful. We will look back in 10 years and say something changed that year in terms of global relations, as long as it doesn't trash the ecosystem's doing quite well now, I think, actually, with the humans traveling around less and less flying and things like this. But as long as it doesn't trash the entire system we have.
It's touch and go. The human story is never fully written. Now, there was an earthquake and a tsunami, right? Was it in South America? Where was it?
Indonesia.
In Chile?
Indonesia. Oh.
It was 10 or 15 years ago. It was before the big tsunami. There was a tsunami in South America on the West Coast. I forget which country exactly.
Okay.
And immediately people from all over the world sent money. They got together shipping containers of food and supplies. There was just people all over the world felt sympathy. And it was a little town, and they started receiving all this aid. And before then, say when there was the Irish potato famine, there was a blight, killed the potatoes, and people were starving. One of the Native American tribes scraped together as much money as they could and sent it to Ireland. And
I know the history there. Actually, the Ottoman Empire was one of the few European powers that sent anything to the Irish at that time. Yeah. And very few. It's actually much rarer in those days. And I mean, the potato famine was actually a genocide. It was, Britain was the UK was exporting food from Ireland throughout. So it wasn't quite as accidental as it sort of may have first seem. But I think there's been an increase in those kind of behaviors over time.
Yes. And again, because we have the ability to communicate with people all over the planet and be aware, and that is hopeful, because it shows there's this generosity actually within the hearts of ordinary people. And in crisis, sometimes that comes to the surface, and there's a sense of we're pulling together, and I'm helping my neighbor, even if the neighbor is across the Atlantic or across the Pacific.
Also locally here, if I may jump in, Camille, as well, I've seen people getting closer to their neighbours because of this crisis, like getting to know the people around them. And there's a warmth. Sometimes, you know, where was I? Today I heard someone just say, stay safe to someone. And it was like a kind of a real warmth between strangers. And talking to the guy in the coffee, I was stocking up on coffee in the coffee shop to, you know, take home. And the guy was really, you know, it was a real connection. I was like, okay, well, I hope your business does okay. And I hope you don't lose too much money. And he was like, okay, we'll stay well. And there was a community connection aspect that isn't always there. Yeah. So I'm noticing a bit of that as well with this.
Yes, and it's safe.
It's important to use moments of crisis to wake up to life. Like we live in a wealthy area, so to speak, and all of our neighbors have new model Mercedes, BMWs, Land Rovers, Maseratis, Porsches,
Tesla,
and Teslas. And when we're walking, so we live on a harbor, and there's this long road. It's about a mile long. It runs alongside these boats, and it's also the driveway. So when people leave their apartments in the morning, many of them are holding their phone in their right hand and looking down at it while absent-mindedly driving about 25 miles an hour, as fast as they can go across the speed bumps.
Yeah.
It's this beautiful area, and there's a lot of women with baby carriages pushing their baby carriages. They're out getting exercise and walking the baby. And moms with babies, they're so sleep deprived, they sometimes step into the road without looking because they're like asleep on their feet from nursing the baby all night. And our neighbors, I worry about them because they're not in their bodies at all. Mm. They just woke up, showered, and they're driving their beautiful car. And instead of rejoicing in life, like put on a great piece of music, roll along, smelling the air. It always smells good here. We're on the ocean.
It's a pleasant part of the world. Yeah.
They're not in reality at all. They're totally distracted. And it's a miracle there aren't more accidents. But human bodies unconsciously can handle it. Like we can all chew gum and walk at the same time, but they're not enjoying their life. And they need someone, they need to be slapped in the face or something short. They do. Because once in a while, these people driving along, looking down at their phone will kill somebody. Like just walking around Los Angeles, many times, me and other pedestrians, we have to leap out of the way while someone looking down at their phone blasts through a red light.
Right.
And drives right through the crosswalk full of pedestrians. We all leap out of the way.
It's certainly a metaphor for sort of a way of living, isn't it? As well as the obvious sort of traffic risk.
Not paying attention.
Yeah.
They're not fully awake, which is partly because we're all so rich. We're somebody who has clean water coming out of their tap.
Yes.
It's not freezing, and there's food to eat and has a place to stay. Just lower middle class person living in the Western world is richer than an emperor in any time in the past.
Right. I think that every time I order food, I'm going, hang on a minute, someone is delivering this food to my house from some exotic cuisine that my grandparents never even tried, Thai food or whatever. Yeah. I'm like an emperor eating like a king, should I have Thai food or Vietnamese food tonight? It's really quite something, and I to be aware of that. And I bet many of your neighbors don't know each other as well, right? I tend to find in poorer communities, people know each other more. And that means there's a lack of social resilience, I would call it, or communal resilience in these kind of communities. When shit does hit the fan, they don't have people to rely upon.
Well, I have to say, our building, we know our neighbors and love our neighbors. There's a lot of connection. A lot of friendliness and conversations happening on the fly. So I'm very happy about that, this particular building.
That's great.
Complex, yes. So I'm just holding up that other side of it, that I think people are learning again to stay in the immediacy. What is actually happening in my experience in this moment. Where am I? Who am I with? What do I care about? What matters to me? How can I be more present to receive the gifts of life each moment? How can I share them in ways that promote, my own gratitude and my own sense of well-being and living the life that I am designed for? That's the challenge. Living the life that we each are designed for. Being in touch with that place in ourselves. Our essence, our essential nature, and what is essential to each of us. So that's where all these practices come in, wouldn't you say?
What were you pointing to out the window there? Was there a bird or what was that?
Oh, yeah. We have a resident little Rufus Hummingbird here. He's with us, he for a long, long time. I don't think he migrates. Anyway, he delights us. He just did we call a loop-de-loop, which is where it's communicating probably to possible mates. Anyway, that's a sense of...
Well, listen, that's a nice break. Maybe I should ask you about the Radiance Sutras. This is a book that is super well known. I think people are going to be curious, like how you wrote it and a little bit of the backstory that isn't in the book. Could I ask a little bit about that? quick break in the podcast to ask you to look at techcrowdfund.org. That's TEC for Charlie, crowdfund.org. On here, you can see some ridiculously good deals about embodiment. I mean, most of my books and courses, they're things I'm giving away. This is all related to the Embodiment Conference. You can get a sneak peek at what some of the technology for the conference is going to look like. You can decide if you want to be a Zoom food grandmaster, a ninja professional, a unicorn rider, a dolphin sensei. All this will make complete sense on the website. Take a look. The offers really are very, very good. We're basically raising money ahead for the conference, so there's some offers there that you just won't get again. If you're interested in embodiment, then do check that out. It's TEC for Charlie, crowdfund.org, techcrowdfund.org. And back to the show.
I went to work in that science lab that was doing research on meditation in 1968. It was at the University of California. And one day, in a meeting of laboratory assistants, this woman who had just come back from a silent retreat read a page of the first English translation of this text called the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. And when I heard it, I just fell in love with this text. And then when I finished my PhD in 1987, the thought occurred to me to do a fresh version of the text. And over the next 27 years, I got up at 4 a.m. most days and would chant the Sanskrit of the text and let it teach me about itself. And after about 3 years of doing this, just living inside the Sanskrit for several hours a day, walking around, I did it standing up in the pre-dawn hours, chanting and letting the music of the Sanskrit enchant me. There started to be a flow of English. If that's how you would say something like this in English, because the Sanskrit is poetic.
So are you a Sanskrit scholar? Do you speak Sanskrit?
No, just as a meditation teacher, I live many hours a day immersed in Sanskrit, but I'm not a Sanskrit scholar. Uh-huh. I have lots of friends who are. Sanskrit is so multi-leveled that you could easily identify 10 different levels of discourse.
Right.
And so it's a group enterprise to translate. So scholars tend to translate Sanskrit into academies, which is a specialized language of jargon.
Not my favorite language, I have to say. Yeah. It's interesting, this word translation, because it can mean different things. There can be a very strict translation. For example, I've seen 10 different translations of the Tao Te Ching, for example, at least, and my colleague Francis Bryars wrote one. And they're all different. Some of them are very strict. Some of them are trying to be as accurate as possible. Some are more poetic. Some are almost using the text as a jumping off point for their own work. And there's a certain point where you go, okay, is this their poetry or the translation? And I know you've experienced, I think, some criticism for your having quite a poetic take on it. And personally, for me, I think that's totally valid as long as it's clear that's what it is, right?
Well, I don't use the word translation to describe Radiance Sutras. I never have. Uh-huh. It says a version on the cover inside. And I define my rules, which is I take the definitions of the words, and a Sanskrit word will often have 10 different definitions. It'll have a physical image, an inner spiritual meaning, something to do with yoga, a craft skill such as weaving or making wine or making a psychedelic juice. And there'll be something bodily and sexual, maybe something to do with digestion or the way the body's absorb nutrition, and then something spiritual. So I'll use the actual definition of the word, and then I play with it. And as a way of inviting the reader into the bodily experience that the text is singing of.
The other thing I would say is that when I first met Lorin, I was impressed with the research that he'd done and the many thousands of interviews he did with meditators as part of creating his master's and PhD theses. And what struck me was that in listening to people attempting to describe their internal experience, it was matching something that Lorin knew from that text. And so when Lorin is writing, it's coming also from being informed by that process and feeling into the energetic reality, the internal, actual, embodied, energetic, cosmic, you could say, the multidimensional experience that people actually have if you take the time to listen to them as they go into this being in touch with themselves and then attempting to bring language to it. So it's that process as well. It's not like above, coming from on high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like this is what you're supposed to experience. It's more like this is what actually happens. This is something that people, like just people you wouldn't expect. If you give them a chance and a context, they'll have a revelation from their own inner nature coming to the surface.
Yeah.
And that's the essence. That's so my desire and Lorin's desire, I would say, is to be able to reflect that to people and give them ways to support and build on that reality, their own inner direct experience, rather than imposing. You should do that.
Yeah.
Meditation teachers really need to be trained in somewhat of the way that a therapist is, where you have 3,000 hours of supervised clinical work before you would open up your shingle. Really, meditation teachers should spend 3,000 hours just listening to a wide variety of different kinds of people talking about their natural meditative experiences. And then you'll learn that regular people have profound spiritual meditative experiences in all manner of things. And these experiences that regular people have are exactly what the sacred texts are talking about. Dancers, kids in raves, musicians in the middle of a chord, late night pot smokers, people walking their dog, people making love, people giving and receiving massages, people wandering in nature, cooks making food, people making food for people that they love.
Very common to hear about altered states, meditative experiences, isn't it? When you actually listen with those ears, you'll hear, a very ordinary, in inverted commas, person who doesn't meditate, doesn't consider themselves spiritual, talk about quite deep things. And as you say, states they had during sports when they were young or
sports,
whatever it is. Yeah.
Human beings have a natural genius for meditation. And meditation teachers tend to have no idea. They think they're the experts. But I know everybody. I know all the experts, and I've listened to regular people for tens of thousands of hours over the last 52 years. That's how I did my bachelor's degree and my master's and my PhD, was correlating people's inner experience with the physiology. And I constantly learn from regular people about these little secrets that they have. It's in their games, it's in their addictions, it's in their hobbies, it's in the stuff that they love.
It's instinctive.
Meditation is an instinct. That's right.
Yes. And that's really stunning when you think about it, that the ability to meditate and the fact that people actually have had these moments of meditation from the very beginning of time, but it's not represented that way. It's usually, what we have inherited are from mostly monastic traditions, and it was, which is valuable. We love that and we learn from that. But the sense of updating currently, for example, for women,
Mm-hmm.
that nobody ever asked until our book, really.
Let's ask about this then. I think it's the next book I was curious about. So let me be devil's advocate, because I rather like that.
Yeah.
Why does there need to be a meditation book for women? Surely you're the same as us men. Why do you need your own book? I don't get it. So tell us why.
Well, I'll just start with a disclaimer saying that I get emails or, in person, men who have, for some reason, picked up the book and started reading and do relate to most.
Right.
But there are, first of all, there are very real hormonal differences.
Mm-hmm.
and just a woman's general experience and her own relationship to her body. There are dimensions of a woman's reality and just the fact of being female, and that are natural and intrinsic in the ways that we're talking about. They just never have been talked about. There's been this sense of, many of the rules, you could say, of meditation are from that other, middle.
I get it. I think I'm with you on the sort of hormonal stuff. That makes sense to me. And give me a sense of sort of the rules that might not apply, because I haven't seen this book of yours yet. So I'd love to know a bit more about it.
Well, it'll, like when people pick it up, first of all, just the question, well, what is a woman's experience in meditation, or what do women need? What are women's strengths in meditation? Mm-hmm. What do we bring to the conversation of what inner practices are? The embodied element is very, very important for women. Yes, it is very important for everyone. But for the female nature, it's essential, because then it's when you experience something in your own embodied reality, it. It goes all the way through. It's not somebody else's rule about how I'm supposed to be. If there's anything that we've learned, in the last decades, it's that women need to feel a sense of their own sovereignty, a sense of them being able to rest in their own nature, not having to conform to the male ways of doing things, the male understanding of power. Now, we're all in an evolutionary movement around this, obviously. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful, that there's more of an interplay and conversation and recognizing of commonality and basic experience of being alive. But there's sense of taking time for herself generally. Women, particularly those who have families or are tending to babies and cooking for, there's a natural, outflow of taking care of the outer world. And the last part of nature, the last part of, the world that gets taken care of is her own inner being, her own body, her own heart. And the intensity of being alive, the intensity of loving, and how we tend to hold the world. There's a very empathic quality that women have, and men as well. But there are things in a woman's experience that just need to be mirrored and strengthened. Just be part of the conversation, for goodness sake.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm old-fashioned. I think it's okay to say there are differences, and those differences are general and shouldn't be prescriptive and don't apply to everybody equally. And it's okay to say there are general differences. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone in Northern California out there or Berlin listening to this. That is just how I see the world. And that's important because, as you say, otherwise those differences get pushed aside. Maybe the traditions have all come from men, and in large part, at least in the sort of written or external or power forms. And actually, maybe something's getting missed there. So if we have to acknowledge that general and non-prescriptive difference if we're going to be inclusive, I think, truly.
That's beautifully said. Very, very well said. Yes. And then, women can show up in the business world and by all of the rules that apply there, all of the expectations that arise, we can do that. But what I see in working with women in corporate worlds and so forth is that they very often have to suppress something more deeply important, and that things get out of balance, just like. And the bigger picture of what's going on in the world is an example of things being out of balance in that way. So
lovely. I've also heard that many times, and maybe let's, as we move towards wrap up, move towards back to this bigger picture. Then this idea of crisis as an opportunity to wake up. We've talked about male, female things being out of balance, the opportunities for spirituality in daily life, and how that can be naturally occurring. So, I mean, coming full circle here, are there any more thoughts on meditation in a time of crisis?
Yeah. Well, in reality, everyday life is a crisis.
Right. The illusion of safety and control, right? Really,
life is just one damn thing after another. We're our to-do list is little teeny crises. Oh, my God, that thing has to get done now. And like just a person coming home from work. Oh my God, I'm so tired. But I have to eat because I put off eating until just before I go to sleep. Then I won't digest the food and it'll bother me all night. So I have to eat now because my body needs it because I haven't eaten in 7 hours or whatever. But I have to sleep. But I'm so stressed.
After crisis.
I have to sleep, but I have to go to work tomorrow. So damn, I have to go to sleep now, even though I would love to stay up late and talk to my friends and party and communicate and feel the joy of life. So we're always bound in the rhythm of a day. And there's lots of little crises. The baby has to be fed, or the kids have to be told.
Tuesday is a crisis, isn't it? It's just Tuesday. It's another crisis.
But as we get automated to it, we sort of fall asleep. We get robotic. And when we perceive that this is a crisis, then we wake up. The problem is that we forget that every little tiny moment is important. Mm-hmm. Actually, nothing has changed with the global shutdown. It's trying to protect, everybody's always trying to protect life, really.
Yeah. And there's always danger, right? I mean, you could at any point have a brain aneurysm or a heart attack, or
at any point
a cancer cell grows in your body. I mean, this is constantly, the threat of death is constantly looming over us. The walk out in the road, as you said earlier.
In reality, every moment. So the question is, how do we live as if we just had a near-death experience without having to have a near-death experience? Without having to, like, people who actually have been dead and come back, and then they'd go, oh my God, they tell everybody, you have to live every moment, cherish every moment. If you love somebody, tell them that you love them, gush love at them, be grateful for every single second that you're alive. And that's the utility of meditation. Meditation, you can define it as the practice of falling in love with life. Mm-hmm. And communing with that juicy essence of the life force. That's what it's about. It's not mystical, particularly any more than sex is mystical or music is mystical. It's that level of natural miraculousness of life. Meditation is the process of cherishing more and more the simple gift of aliveness and welcoming the thrill of aliveness and feeling the fear, whatever fears you have, and going through those fears into a state of heightened joy.
Mm-hmm. So those are the ways of doing that, the ways of washing fear out of the nervous system, of retrieving our own nervous system from a lot of the, collective entrancement. That's a process. And
what do we do now, Camille? A lot of fear around right now, because I'm often excited, this death meditation, this falling in love with life. I'm definitely experiencing this at the moment, but a lot of people are just in fear. So any advice on that?
Well, it's interesting. Just a couple of days ago, we gave a global webinar, just offered it out because this is so much in people's minds right now. And these are the kinds of questions that people ask. How can I feel stirred up. I feel stressed. I can feel my whole, I'm shaking. I'm, worried. And so it's that, again, coming to meet oneself, first of all, with profound tenderness. And what does it feel like? So one of the practices, for example, would be to bring, simple instinctive movement of bringing one's hands to one's heart and feeling that sense of, okay, I'm embraced, and then being in touch with the larger body of nature and all of the resources that are right here with us all the time. And that helps to give us a context for then the process of fears arising and kind of moving through, sometimes actually needing to physically move our fear or our anger or whatever the difficult energies are. That's the life force. That's the prana shakti wanting to be freed up for creativity and adaptive response to our situations. So finding ways to tend our energy body, all of our energies, so that they can be humming along and feel more resourceful. We can feel more resourceful for whatever's coming on. Make sense?
Nice. Definitely being one of those ones I'm going to have to listen back to. I love doing the podcast and listening back to it later and going, I didn't get that the first time. Cool. Yeah,
it's available for everybody if anybody wants.
Okay, so we need to be moving towards wrap up. Is there anything about the body that you haven't said or I haven't asked you about? We have a little time.
Well, the body is rhythm. So we breathe in and out every couple of seconds, and our heart beats about every second or so. So you could actually just appreciate that. Wow, my heart beating, put your hand on your heart or anywhere you feel your pulse and feel your breathing. And just say, oh my God, like I am a rhythmic flow. That's just a simple acknowledgement of reality. And when we breathe, it's extraordinary. Air, which is a substance, it's clear usually, unless we're smoking or we're in Beijing or something. It's clear, and yet it's a substance. You can feel it if you wave your hand around or if you breathe fast. So we're actually breathing in this substance that comes mostly from the ocean and from all the plants of the world. It's the oxygen in the air. And then within a moment, that oxygen is now circulating everywhere in our body, and it's feeding these little teeny fires, these little teeny fireplaces that we call cells. So we have trillions of cells in our body, and each one is a little fire burning. I forget what it is in centigrade. We in the U.S.
37.
Yeah, in the U.S. we use this weird system, Fahrenheit. But so it sounds like it's 100. We burned it almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It sounds impressive. It's 90. But we're warm day and night because we're a fire. So a human being, a metabolic being, is flame, and this flame is being fed by the breath of life. So we're rhythm, we're flow, that physical reality. We're breath, which is substance. We're pulsation, and we're fire. And we're an ocean. Like our blood that's always flowing in our veins is salty, like an ocean. So we're an ocean. And so these are physical reality facts. It's biological, and it's also the stuff that yoga talks about. And we can rejoice in that. And taking a few moments, even a few seconds in a day to rejoice in this miraculous functioning of the body, it gives you a tremendous boost. It centers you and helps you cope with stress and helps you enjoy life more. It's very biological. The pulsation of the heart, the rhythm of the breath, the flows everywhere in the body, the warmth, the fire inside, the ocean inside. This is the stuff that meditative experience is made out of. And you can access it in your own favorite way, whether it's music, eating, smelling delicious food, lovemaking, dancing, wandering in nature, being in your garden, walking the dog. You can access these moments in your own favorite way.
I think that's a nice place to wrap up. Where can people find out more about you if they want to look online? What's the best website to go to? I'm trying to find it now on my phone. Well, Camille's website's always like more up to date than mine. She's a coherent person. Women are just better than men, I think. CamilleMaurine.com. And that's Maurine, spelled Maurin for November E.
And if you just type meditation secrets for women, you'll find Camille.
Okay.
And my website's lorinroche.com.
Lorin.
Yeah. And there's meditationtt.com because we do meditation teacher training.
Yes.
So, or if you type the Radiance Sutras, you'll find me.
Yeah.
We'll find you there. Okay. Well, guys, I need to head out now. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it. A very beautiful highlight for my day. Well, otherwise quite stressful. So thank you both. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
I hope you have time for a couple of
breaths. No, this has been my radiant shower of the day. That's how I'm looking at it. Bye, guys.
It's beautiful.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Embodiment Podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator Course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.